July 2021 is when I lost my dad. That was hard. It came down to one of those essential questions in life, which is, what am I meant to do? So whatever it was that I was doing in my corporate role just felt like I am not necessarily making as big of an impact that I could be doing.
Welcome to Wholly Fractional, the podcast dedicated to elevating the role and success of fractional workers everywhere. I am your host, Andrew Graft, here with my co-host, Todd Hines. Wholly Fractional, the future of work starts here, and it starts now. Welcome, everyone, to today's edition of Wholly Fractional. I'm Andrew Graft here with my amazing Diet Coke and even more amazing co-host Todd Hines. Say hello to everyone, Todd.
Living up to that Diet Coke is the goal here. Doing all right.
I think that's a reasonable goal. So, hey, today here on Wholly Fractional, I just want you to know we have a real treat. One of my favorite people. She's wise. She's super talented. She's fully fractional. She is Dipti Patel. Welcome, Dipti, to the show.
Welcome, Dipti.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Todd. I'm so happy to be here and having this conversation with both of you.
Well, it's our pleasure. Yeah, I met Dipti a number of months ago, and from the get-go, I kind of knew that Dipti was one of my people. She brings a really unique perspective to the world of fractionalism. Here on the show, we are all about trying to help introduce the world and more than anything, elevate the mission and the role and the success of fractionals everywhere. But the kind of perspective that Dipti brings, she comes, I'll let her tell her story, but she came in as a product leader into the fractional world. But some of the things my takeaways talking with her really were also around her role as a leadership and a career coach. And frankly, I love the positive and very grounded energy she brings to the world. And I wanted to share that with the rest of that world. So with that, Dipti, nothing to live up to there. Okay, I want to start with a really the easiest softball question in the world, which is, which one of your parents was your favorite?
Oh, that's so tough, Andrew.
You have to pick one.
Oh my goodness.
There's no, okay. All right.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, you think about that one.
Mm-hmm.
We'll move on to something a little more tough. Tell us a little bit about you, your background, your journey. We would just love to hear kind of people who don't know you. Tell us about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out my career in data analytics, and little did I know when I started working for a startup that I would actually someday be able to be head of product for some of the things that I'd helped build as well. And I had really great leadership. I worked under the CEO. I, at some point, was part of lots of different paths of things that I just kind of grew along the way, things that never even thought about that I would actually get the opportunity to be part of. And I was just given those opportunities to learn and grow. And I kept growing from there to a point where, fast forward, August 2023, I'd been struggling for about 2 years in terms of just, there has to be something more. And at that point, I was head of product in my role. And I was also considering going, what's next? All of these things every year, it's I want to get to this leadership position. I want to do this stuff. I want to get here. And everything I would think I want to get done, I would actually go get those things done. And then reaching to that position, I just felt like there has to be more to life than what I'm doing just here. And so I decided to take a break at that point, and I pivoted my career into becoming a leadership and a career coach.
If I remember correctly, you were working in the heart of Silicon Valley at that time. Am I remembering correctly?
Yes. Still based in the Bay Area, still here. And so got exposure to a lot of different things as part of all of that. Also got the exposure of being part of M&A teams and representing product from that perspective.
Well, for people who may not know the ins and outs of what it means to be head of product, give someone just a high level sense of what that entails, not just the product side of it, but then also being really the head of that product division.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love not just the building part, but I also love the people part. And I always saw myself as there is something about wanting to help somebody else grow in their career. And it's almost like this aspect of, I've been there. I struggled with that. Let me help you with that. And so there is an aspect of that I took both of those things together in terms of saying, I'd love to become a people manager someday.
I very much respect the role that you play there. Now, again, if I remember correctly, you were in that world for a good couple of decades. Am I
Yeah.
remembering correctly?
Close to 2 decades now, not necessarily as head of product, but in that industry, in the roles of just building digital products based on data, close to 2 decades before when I left in 2023.
Gotcha. And so your career is humming right along, climbing the ranks. You've done the thing that so many of us aspire to. What happened? You eventually left that, as you talked about. Tell me a little bit about your transition and your experience.
Yeah, and I have to actually share something more personal before like sharing in terms of how I got to that decision. Because even when I left, I was working with the new management team and they absolutely loved me. They had promised in terms of just more career growth, in terms of even more stuff that I could actually do within the company, helping them. At that point, also working with the new management team, they wanted me to grow with them, do the things, share the vision with me, all of those great things. But 2 years prior to that, we were in the pandemic. And July 2021 is when I lost my dad. That was hard because that was sudden. It almost came down to one of those essential questions in life, which is, what am I doing here? What am I meant to do? So whatever it was that I was doing in my corporate role just felt like I am not necessarily making as big of an impact that I could be doing. And so that actually started kind of coming at me in different ways in terms of saying, is this it? There has to be more than just it. There has to be more ways than just thinking about, are we making enough profit? Are these products growing? What are we actually going to do about next quarter's earnings? All of those things just seemed minor in terms of thinking about life itself. And so I started from that point, embracing that, saying there's more to life than what I'm doing. And also to note, like, once I throw myself into something, I just throw 100%. So when I was head of product, at that point also, just the work that I was doing, I was pulled in so many directions. So essentially, there was an aspect of me burning out also. And with the aspect of having lost my dad, I felt like that was just taking a bigger toll on me. So personally, it was just from all angles, things were coming at me and I was looking at it, more meaning in my life, more impact, more purposeful things that I was doing than just essentially building products.
Dipti, this is actually one of the many reasons that I feel like you and I had shared connection in our conversations. Everyone who knows me knows one of the reasons I've pursued fractional work, left a long career to sort of go into business for myself and in the fractional world has to do a lot with, health issues in my own family with aging parents. And in hearing your story and talking about, your father and his impact on you and your decision for how you're going to live the rest of your life, I found that very riveting. And if it's not too personal, I would really be interested in knowing, tell us a little about your dad and tell us a little bit about what he meant to you, what kind of effect he had on you, ultimately as a person and a professional.
Yeah. So my dad is so special in so many different ways. Like, I actually look at it as, how lucky am I to have been born as a child to him? That's how I look at it. He's in so many ways a mentor to me, a guide to me. Even now, today, I still think of him as he's out there somewhere, he's still guiding me. And he's one of the 8 siblings in his family. First in his family to have left home in India and moved to Kenya in Africa. And by profession, he was a mechanical engineer. He saw an opportunity and there was something that he felt like, yeah, I think I can actually do this. And so he took that risk and he moved there. And we didn't know anybody there in terms of like having family or friends or whatever. He felt that there was a good risk to have taken at that point to actually move there, start his life there. And we were there for 4 years in Kenya and then moved to Nigeria. There were so many aspects of just all of his struggles. And he comes from a family where we weren't born into a rich family. It was more of like struggling day-to-day stuff. And just being an engineer was such a big thing for him. And making sure his kids all got a good education was his biggest dream. And actually for me and my siblings to come to America that was his big thing, which is so always encouraging going, go there, study there, get settled there. And so when I have two other siblings and they're both here in Sacramento now, and that was a blessing. So when he retired, he actually moved here. And so we got to live with him. And I would say he's just a life force, just so many struggles, yet everything he looked at life was so joyfully. He would take things so easy.
What were some of your biggest takeaways? I mean, like, what did you pull from his story that you feel like has really inspired you or led you forward? When you think about your dad, what inspires you and impels you forward?
I would say for me, it's my dad's thing about just live life fully, be happy. He was just so joyful. And there were parts of his childhood which I didn't even know what it meant in terms of like making sure he could actually have the tuition to get to college, like year to year, just making sure you get through. Some of the struggles I found out later. And yet knowing my dad was just every day was just live every day joyfully and just being grateful for being here and staying curious and learning. Those are some of those takeaways that I take from my dad. And that's why when he passed, it was a big learning for me, which is I don't feel like I'm living that. I don't feel like I'm actually as joyful as he is, even when he passed away.
Did he pass away after a long illness? Did you know it was
No.
coming?
Yeah, it was 6 months before he passed away when he started getting ill. And then it was a sudden kind of a visit to the hospital. And then he had passed away within, I would say once he got admitted to the hospital, it was within 12 days or so that he had passed away. So it was sudden. And I would say that none of us were prepared for that. And that I think it's another one of those things when life throws at you, you really start reconsidering going, okay, what am I doing here? What is the meaning of life? I always just assumed he's going to be here forever.
So Todd, as you know, I'm wont to do, I've been filibustering and hogging all of the question time. Before I just continue down my excited list of questions, did you have anything you wanted to jump in and ask at this stage?
I am thoroughly enjoying this conversation. Dipti, I love your heartfelt, this voice that was not going away as you're climbing the corporate ladder. And now you get to this point and the loss of a parent can just drop kick you into a new reality from which you will never really be the same. And I would love to hear a little bit about how you, going from climbing the corporate ladder and working with one organization, how you were able to express your heart's desire, your zest for life, and really contribute your special gifts, who you are to the world in this fractional work or doing something, bringing your talents into this new format, this new framework.
Yeah. So it was 2019. I had started exploring. So I was already thinking about what's next in terms of there's a level of fulfillment that I was actually looking for when even in my corporate job that I felt like some parts were missing in terms of, is this it? Like, is this what people dream about, talk about? So I was already figuring out a way at that point to exit from corporate in terms of saying, how can I have things of, building things, working on things that I want to do, but also have time and energy for things that I want to explore. There are parts of our passions that we never explore further. And I just didn't feel like I had time for it. But coaching was one aspect of it, which is I really love this idea of coaching others and basically seeing what you could do to help somebody look at life. And I'd worked with coaches at that point. So that's why I actually felt like there was such an unlock for me. And it felt like that could be something that could be so useful for other people as well. So I started working at that point, just kind of getting certification. One of my values is I love to learn. So even as busy as I was at that point, I started taking on different things in terms of just getting a certification, exploring, just basically saying, let me go explore this path. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to do anything with it, but I'll just go ahead and do this. So I did that and I really loved it. And so then I started building this idea out that I could actually do this on my own. I could step away from this and I could actually go build my own business and figure out a way to help others as well. And I have nobody in my family who is a business owner. So this was like a really wild idea for me. My brother and sister are engineers as well. So like really hardcore in terms of just, trained to actually go work at corporates.
But it was your passion, though. I mean, if I remember from our conversation, you described before a moment ago how you were asking, is this it? And one of the questions that came to my mind until you said coaching was, what more were you hoping to get? But I'm guessing it just had to do with fulfillment and it was just empty. Do you feel like something about coaching made you feel like maybe this is that thing?
Exactly. And that's how I started actually at work. Once I was a people manager, started working with people. The best part of it was actually helping somebody see what they can't actually see in themselves and actually help them see what more potential they have and how many other options and challenges that they can actually get through as well. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of a nudge or a little bit of a push for somebody to actually see it in a different manner. And it clicks for them. And I find that very joyful in terms of somebody being able to make connecting those dots in their head for themselves. And so I felt like, how do I do more of this? And I knew if I don't actually leave this path and go explore it, because I like to go all in. And I was like, if I don't do this, I'm always going to be tied to my computer work, starting my days at 7 a.m., ending days at 6 p.m., leaving no time and energy to actually go explore some of these other things that I want to do. And so that's essentially where I decided I have to go explore this. And in order to go explore this, what do I need to do? So it took me a little bit of time in thinking, maybe I could just do it as a side hustle while I was working. But I always also believe what worked for one person doesn't necessarily work for somebody else, because you got to know yourself too. And I knew myself, like I didn't have that discipline to draw the boundary from work at that point because of just the responsibility, of just the deliverables, people waiting on you. There's always somebody saying, I need you to approve this. I need you to read this. So there was always that type of a pressure to work through. And also then whatever was yours would always be the last thing you get to.
What kind of professionals do you typically work with? Describe for someone who doesn't know what it is to be an executive leadership or a career coach. Talk about the problems and talk about some of the solutions you focus on.
Yeah. So as a leadership and career coach, I'm mostly working with professionals who are that 10-year mark in their career, figuring out what they want to do next. It's either they're stagnant at their job, they've plateaued at what they're doing, they're feeling a little lost. They're also feeling I want to transition out from this, but I don't know how to transition as well. And sometimes looking at it holistically helps them as well. Sometimes the answer just comes back to being, hey, you know what? You're doing really well wherever it is. Maybe you just need to change a few of these things from here. And the aspect of what I enjoyed most was particularly working with senior women in tech. And I figured out a way for myself, and the love of continuous learning, I would take courses. I had a very encouraging boss who would always take me along for meetings and expose me to different things. And that helped me build my self-confidence. But in talking to a lot of professionals, I learned that a lot of them actually had self-confidence issues in terms of just figuring out how to ask for what they want, wanting to be a leader, but not necessarily knowing how to express that. And sometimes some people were just so into, this is what I'm doing and this is where I am. And you leave that aspect of fulfillment. I think it's a privilege if you get to a point where you can actually think about it. Sure, when you're starting your career, paycheck is everything. But at a certain point, you start looking at life holistically and you start looking at what else can I do? And I also feel there's an aspect of serving others. For me, that was the most important part as well, which is in doing the work I was doing, I felt like I was serving a smaller community of people, an organization. And there's so much more that I could actually essentially do.
And this is one of the reasons very much why I felt like this is a great place for us to have this conversation, Dipti, because from the conversations I've had with other fractionals, consultants, solopreneurs going into business for themselves, one of the consistent themes I've heard are people like yourself who have said, I'm not sure that this is everything that it's cracked up to be. I mean, I know I'm supposed to be happy with my title and my money. And still at the end of it, there's something nagging at them saying, I'm not happy. And I really feel like the skill set you bring very naturally is something that, I mean, what may draw very many of our listeners. I mean, we'll have our how to contact you later, but I mean, I suspect there are many individuals out there who are saying, I could stand to talk to somebody who has been there at some of the more cutthroat, lack of a better term, just high pressure situations in their careers, and be good to talk to someone like yourself. Before, when we were talking, you described your approach. One of the ways you described your approach, you said, I'm very much about going deep into my clients' fears and helping them align their inner power. And it's very powerful. What does that look like in practice? And can you give us some examples of what that's looked like and some people that have benefited from that guidance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we actually lose the ability to listen to ourselves. And once we start actually working, we pay so much attention to everybody. So there's a lot more in terms of external validation that we seek. We seek, external validation from our manager saying, how am I doing? Am I doing well? External validation from my colleagues. Am I liked enough? Do they actually think I'm competent in terms of all the things? And at some point, you stop listening to yourself in terms of saying, and there's other aspects of you also. And so I'll give this as an example. I had a client who I worked with, and she was basically thinking about moving from an engineering role to a product role. And she was basically wanting to do that because in her senior position, she was also getting bogged down with the bureaucracy of getting this approved and that approved, and then losing the aspect of actually just doing the work. And so working with me, it was one of those things like, what did you really enjoy doing? Why did you actually become an engineer? And it became clear to her going, I love building things. I used to compete in science fairs and stuff because I used to enjoy just building things. So at the end of the day, when we finished working together, it turned out to her was she was looking to actually change her position because she thought if she went into products, she would actually just be able to focus on building products. And then she realized in her role as an engineer, she just needed to figure out whether she wanted to stay in the role where she was, because she was playing a role of just basically taking on all admin type of work and getting further away from the core value of building. So once that was clear to her, she started making her changes, and she actually moved and made a move to another company within 3 months of like just going through. And I'm talking of just, this was last year. So this isn't even like talking 2 years ago, but in this market, just being able to get there. This is such a small thing, which is where you just align yourself to what you think is the most important to yourself. And you look into basically saying, how do I find that which I actually am uniquely able to do, and combine that with all the different experience that you have. And you actually align that and bring it out there. There is definitely a market for somebody like that. And so essentially that's what I help people do, which is there's somebody who's looking at, I don't necessarily want to be in product forever. I want to be in product for maybe the next 7 or 8 years, build out my financial runway. And then I actually want to go build something else. And I want to go build a Pilates studio or something, which is sure, you can do that as well. So it's really important to help people say out loud their dreams and things it is that they actually want to do.
Well, this sounds very much like an incredibly relevant point to the people I've spoken to and the people who are likely listening to our program today. How would you express that same point of view to people who are now venturing into this fractional consulting, go on your own space? And again, you and I have had this conversation, but I would love to hear your take on why you feel like that is so relevant to this conversation.
Yes, for sure. And by no means, Andrew, you know this, I'm not an expert in the fractional space yet. I am myself just starting out this path. So I like to be clear on those aspects, saying I don't necessarily have the answers for how to make it successfully as a fractional, but I feel like those elements of being aligned with your values and being able to still bring your experience and things that you've learned. And I hope that whoever I'm working with appreciates that I bring my background of data analytics and building products and being a good leader and being able to help their team elevate to that next level as a value add to themselves. And that's a win for them. And it's fractional work. So that's a win for me because it now allows for me to actually go do some of the work that I want to do, which is another path that I actually didn't share. Is I always thought about wanting to write more. And again, it's a space of being a creative, and you need to make space for that. And that can't necessarily exist with 7 a.m. through 6 p.m. meetings and then 15 minutes to write something. You need to be in that space and zone for that. And so I started taking that on and exploring that aspect. So to your point, I feel like this is a really great way of actually figuring out going, how can what I've done so far, my experience, how can I add that as a value for an organization? And I'll do this as fractional work for them. And that allows me to still continue doing and pursuing some of my own passions as well.
And this is something I've talked a lot about, but this idea that aligning with your values, there are a couple of things that come from that. One is that you change the success metrics of your life once you realize what are the things that bring you joy. And for me, that was an incredible learning, which was I am now pursuing the life I want in the way I want, whether it's multiple pursuits like writing and product and coaching, or whether it's marketing and podcasting or whatever that is, but it belongs to me and my passions. And so from one perspective, there's just simply, it's not all about whether it's money or that, it's the totality of life. And then secondly, to your point, you align yourself with your passion. No one can tell me you're not a better employee, contributor, all of those things when you really are lined up with everything that you are. If that's kind of what you feel too, but I know I do.
Absolutely. 100% what you said right there, which is if you actually fill yourself up in terms of all these other things, there's just this element of energy. There's an element of just being able to keep going at some of those things, even when things get challenging. That's essentially what you're doing at any workplace that you're going. Things are not always going to be rosy. There are going to be things that you're given and it's going to get challenging. But that which allows you to continue going through that, even with a high level of energy, going through those challenges, that's essentially what I would say those success metrics that you're looking at. It's like if you're feeling fully yourself, then you actually bring your full self to your workplace as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You've also talked a lot about the importance of taking courageous action. I would love for you to share with the audience what you mean by that, and if there are some examples of courageous actions that you've encouraged your clients to take.
Yes. I'll start out by using myself as an example. When I left my job, I had to write it down on a piece of paper for myself. This is the date I'm actually going to exit. And because I had chickened out of it a couple of times. Because again, when you look at it from an external perspective, okay, your bosses are great right now. You have a new team. They want you to do more and you can continue growing. Then you could basically say, I don't have a reason to live right now. And I look at it from an external perspective, but I know I want to. And I know I am going to have one of those things I think about is if you fast forward and you're 80 years old, what's that one thing you're actually going to say to yourself? I regret not having done this. And this thing for me was, I regret not having taken a bet on myself to actually go explore this thing. And that's how I looked at it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to give myself this much runway. These are all the things risks that came up in my head. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? I started making a list of all of those things. And I basically gave myself a deadline saying, but this is the date I'm leaving. And so that was my very first courageous step of basically saying, I'm going to do that and I'm going to leave because I want to go explore this other side. And in product, we look at things as experiments. And I looked at this as an experiment for myself, saying, I'm leaving this, I'm going to go experiment on this, and I'll actually see the results of how this turns out to be for myself. And my metric at that time was, can I actually become more joyful? Can I actually make more impact? Can I actually have a bigger impact than what I'm actually doing here? And so I actually achieved that in 2024. I would say my level of just overall joyfulness throughout the year was so much higher. The way of actually making impact, just without not necessarily working with my clients, I found more ways to be a volunteer for different organizations. And so that actually also helps you fill your cup as well. So that was for me. I'll give an example it means different things for different people. And this one client I was working with, she would get scared just networking. You know how you and I just connected in a community and then we basically said, hey, let's chat. And we got on the call and we started talking. And for her, she would have such a hard time reaching out to her own network and basically saying, can we chat? And so working with me, to me, that's a courageous step for her. That was an action she was not willing to take because she was scared of it. And she was basically saying, I don't know how to do this. I'm good at just building things. I can just do that. Can I not talk to people? And I was like, no, if you're looking for your next role and you're looking outside of your company, you're going to have to connect with other people. So to her, just stepping and doing those little things, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It's also just knowing, going, I'm scared to do this and this feels uncomfortable. It's out of my comfort zone, yet I'm going to go ahead and do this for myself. And that,
Gotcha.
I say, is a courageous step.
Again, Todd, thank you for letting me continue to ask questions. I was about to ask about community because that's a really critical piece in my opinion. But Todd, before I just venture on down the road, any takeaways so far? I know I've had the grace and blessing to know Dipti for longer than you have. And so I'd just be curious to hear what's been your takeaways thus far.
Yeah, thank you. There's so many specific elements that you've touched on that I would love to dig into. So I think that would call for many follow-up conversations. But this idea of courage, and for you, that you mentioned that acting in the service of others was very important. And I just really love, and I think that's worth calling out again, this idea that it often can help us to face our fears and to step forward in courage when we can think, what in service greater than ourselves are we acting in accordance of? So whether that's our families, our sense of ability to position ourselves so we can touch more people, and even, as you mentioned, this element of showing up with joy and having more time to contribute in volunteer work. So I think that was an impactful point for me, that it seems when we can find this way to be of service that's larger than just, I'm trying to get ahead in my career and I think I could make X number more amount of dollars if I went on fractional for myself, finding something to serve can really help to step forward with that courage. So I really love that. And I'm glad you shared that.
It's fantastic. I'm with Todd 100% on that. And it dovetails with community and networking, like we've talked about. In this case, we talk about your client who had a certain fear of reaching out, having conversations, networking. As I've said many times, before I got into this world, I was terrible at networking because, like so many of us, I just was focused on my job and I wanted to be as good at it as possible. And I figured if I was really good at it, then everything else would just take care of itself, to the exclusion of getting to know other people. And stepping into the fractional realm and sort of realizing, one, I wasn't getting very much fulfillment in just sitting in these four walls and working on my computer. I wasn't having human connection. That was one thing. And then thinking, I know I'm supposed to be, they talk about networking, but it sounds so, I'm going to ask someone if they have work for me. And instead, what people like Dipti have really proven to me is what the power of community and networking is in the world, or through the lens of what you just described, Todd, this idea of networking not based on what you can do for me, but for what I can do for you, because that's a magic key for me. Dipti, that's been my journey. What has been your journey relative to networking and community and that approach?
Absolutely. And Andrew, I was you at that point when I was working as well, which is, unless it was just my own team, I didn't necessarily make time to go and meet more people or meet people outside of my own organization. And when I took this leap of faith and kind of started out doing things on my own, also thinking going eventually in the future, I can also start doing fractional work, I started working with a coach as well, a business coach. And my coach's approach to everything was, and especially the line of work that I was also kind of doing, which was everything is connection. And it's not necessarily looking for being opportunistic, going and making it transactional. I think that was the part that was icky to me, which was just making it transactional. But basically saying, how can I make 15 minutes in the day to maybe listen about this person's story and what's their number one goal that they're working on right now? What's most important or what's most exciting to them? And just having that as a conversation. A lot of those conversations basically didn't necessarily lead to anything else. But a lot of them did, which was just like our conversation, which we stayed in touch. And we basically said, there's so many elements here. Let's pull out those threads. And so I've had so many new friendships just because of that. in terms of just knowing people. And then somebody would say, I know this person, let me actually introduce you to them. Or I don't know where this is going to go, let me recommend this to them. So I started taking that approach as well when I'm connecting with somebody, which is, let me know what their goal is, what is it that they're dealing with. And if I know somebody in my network, or if I can actually recommend something, can I be a connector for those two things, or a recommendation for just as simple as, hey, you're trying to do something outside of my area of expertise, but if there's a book that I read recently and that made a difference to me, let me share that with you. So when I started looking at those things from that approach, it just became easier, and just kind of like reaching out to people and saying, hey, I'm new here, or I'm part of this community and I'd love to like connect with like-minded people.
Along those lines, you've mentioned in our previous conversations, there's a difference between acquiring clients and creating clients, which I think was so wise, and it has so much to learn from that statement. Can you talk about that? Expand on what you mean by creating clients versus acquiring clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this audience is really interested in knowing, hey, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. So all credit to the book, The Prosperous Coach, that I was reading at the time, which basically that was the aha for me as I took that away, which is saying, if you don't look at it as acquiring clients, but creating clients, essentially, there's so much pressure when you're actually doing solopreneur work of where's that next lead? Who are you going to talk to next? Like, do you have a pipeline of people that is lined up for you? And that pressure can get real. And I walking into it, working with somebody that was helpful for me, which is always knowing that it takes some amount of lead time to actually find new work and find new people to start working with. And so this idea, when I actually reframed it for myself, it just felt beautiful, which is basically saying it takes whatever it takes to actually connect with somebody and then them to actually earn your trust. And I think this is becoming more relevant in the also noisy kind of world that we're living in, where there's so many people out there, so many people trying to sell you stuff, that buyers essentially are also becoming more, I would say, more picky in terms of saying, can I trust you? I need to actually make sure that I'm interacting with a real person and not with the bot, right? So those are becoming those real things now. So people actually need to connect with you. You need to be able to trust. You need to be able to show that you're competent in what all those things. And I feel that the whole acquisition thing just goes away. It's just that now you've actually created that connection. It becomes a client.
In our conversation, we were talking about that. You used the term needy is creepy.
Yes.
What, for those who may not be able to figure out the very obvious point that's making, what did you mean by that?
So when you get on a call, and I've been on those on the other side, right? Where somebody connects with you very genuinely, naively, you connect with them saying, oh, this seems like a well-wisher or whatever. The next thing you know, you're connecting them, talking to them, the person's already selling. You're saying, da 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 da, I have this thing for you. Would you be interested in buying it? And kind of like, oh my goodness. All right. So that was the whole point of why you wanted to have this conversation with me. And that's the whole idea, which is that there's an energy that people who are desperate can give out, which is, I absolutely need you to like take whatever it is I'm selling to you right now. And that's that whole needy energy. And the way people are doing business now with everybody being online and everything, it doesn't work. It works with you being real, earning their trust, and basically getting to the point where that person then basically says, okay, I'm in a good place in terms of wanting to work with you.
Wow. Do you think there's any application between that and people who are trying to build a fractional business?
I don't know. I wish there was an easier way to separate the two.
No, I'm saying, I got to tell you, that is one of the great takeaways for me in networking is I've had people reach out to me, fortunately not many, but I've had a few where from the get-go, they're firing their one-page sales pitch or whatever. And the relationship starts off very much like, okay, hey man, I'm looking for work. What do you got for me? And it's not so much that I don't want to help, but the energy is so different. I want to help people that I know. I want to know you first. And I know in my former life, many ages ago, I had to learn that as a younger person, very, very driven and very much me. And I learned, hey, let the game come to you. When it comes to networking, the more you put into it, the more comes back to you. That's so critical. And that's was when you talked about needy is creepy. I'm like, there's very much a tie-in between the two. For you personally, are there some specific networks that have been particularly beneficial for you?
I would say this is new to me.
Communities, maybe instead of
Yeah.
networks, maybe communities is a better word.
Communities is probably a better word. I would say that I'm still kind of figuring those communities out for myself. And I have different communities. I have communities for my coaching tribe, coaches like myself. I'm like figuring out new communities for fractional workers as well. And I'm figuring out a community for people who like to write. So I would say I have different communities in terms of just following the passion aspect of it and saying, what does this whole portfolio career look like in terms of which path I actually want to go pursue?
You mentioned a portfolio career, and a lot of people talk about that. The meaning is clear. It's this idea of doing different things that rounds out an entire career. And because I've been so fascinated with your coaching approach and the wisdom that you bring to that, it's easy to overlook the fact that you have an entire career and skill set related to product. And I know we're talking about a coaching, but that's part of that portfolio career. If I understand correctly, you're pursuing that full bore as well.
Yes. For me, that is very, very important. And so it's also the way I look at it as I'm placing all of these different bets. And I made a big shift. Even within my own career, it took me 2 decades to get to where I was. So as I'm making these shifts, I'm going to have to be patient with myself as well. So I'm kind of placing all of these bets as I kind of look at it, and also basically saying, I want to grow this into a plant, and I've just sown the seed. So it's going to take time and effort and energy from my part to actually make sure that I nurture it well. And so that's what I'm looking at as my coaching career. But then everything else also is similar, because those are things that I'm taking my experiences and I'm basically exploring that as different path in terms of different things that I could do. It could even just be consulting work. It could just be taking my ability to actually get things done and going and working in nonprofit someday. So it's all of these things that I pull apart in terms of saying, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And I can probably experiment and think about it in terms of saying, this is what portfolio career means to me.
Well, for anyone who's listening to you and your wisdom and your perspective talking today, and they're saying, I really could stand to have this person on my team in my world or helping me with my product. Is there anything specific to your product pursuits? And not being a product person myself, sometimes it's hard to know, does that all look the same? And I know it never does. Are there some areas that for anyone listening, looking for an amazing product person, that this is sort of your sweet spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually am very good in terms of just bringing that vision to launch. So if you're building something, but you're struggling with, we're having a lot of issues in just getting the MVP out or just getting it to market, that's where I can actually bring my expertise. And again, having a background in data analytics, that always helps with any kind of data related products, but not necessarily limited to that. But that's the expertise that I bring in terms of just being able to execute and get it into market.
Wonderful. Todd, before we venture into our last segment, anything you want to share, ask, weigh in on for our audience or for Dipti?
No, I'm enjoying it. Let's ride this wave. This is great.
All right, fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap this sucker up with something we call the lightning round of questionably fractional questions. Let me hit you with these, Dipti. Are you ready?
I am ready.
It's like that famous questionnaire that they ask on the Actors Studio or on Stephen Colbert. I'm not asking nearly so many questions, but I really want to know the answers to these from your perspective. Are we ready? Question number 1, Dipti. What is your number one favorite piece of software, app, or technology? This is something that you use all the time and you can't live without.
That has to be right now. It's either Spotify or YouTube, because I think YouTube is University of YouTube, because you can learn anything on YouTube.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. All right. Question number 2. What is your favorite or most influential business book?
Ooh, okay. This one is more because this is more recent and this is something I just finished reading. 10x is easier than 2x.
Give us just a brief, what do you learn from that?
It's all about where you actually want to focus your energy and time. So the whole idea is entrepreneurs can actually get more by doing less. I know it's not that whole idea of like, but the whole idea is taking all of your energy and putting it where you really want to go after. And also the aspect of like how we actually think in 2x, which is I made this much, let me make this much, versus thinking in terms of if I took this X and I actually 10x'd it and made it such a big dream. Now you actually think of it from that perspective. You actually start thinking about, I have to eliminate this from my life. I need to actually reprioritize some of these other things. So it's a really fascinating book from that perspective of how you look at it. Going incremental is okay, but if you can actually 10x it, it's much better. And it actually gets easier.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Very businessy coming up here. What was your all-time favorite vacation or place to visit? And it may be the same thing.
Yeah, for me, I would say the favorite vacation so far is being in Kauai, island in Hawaii. And I'll say the reason why. Very recently, somebody had asked me this question because that's the last place that I remember being with my dad on one of my birthdays. And it was an entire family trip. It was everybody. So it was a whole, nephews, nieces, siblings, my sisters-in-laws, a whole bunch of us had gone. We're celebrating a milestone birthday. And my dad, I just remembered that was the place, the last time that I was there with my dad.
My wife and I have been to Hawaii twice and 2 of the islands, and Kauai is our next one. So boy, that hits home with me. Okay, here's one. If you could go back in time, what profession would you have loved to attempt, whether you were successful at it or not?
So I love cooking and I love writing. So this was a hard thing for me, which is like, I think I would have actually gone in to learn English language arts and maybe become a writer. And that I still hold as a dream, which is not maybe, someday I will. And the other one is I'd love to just become a chef. Like, what does it mean to actually go through culinary school and become a chef?
Oh, that's amazing. I love it. All right. Okay, buckle up. This is the hardest one. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received? Or if not advice provided, what is the most important lesson you've learned in life? So really small stuff, really pretty trivial.
Yeah, I think for me, this too shall pass. And I realize going even in hardest moments, I have to tell that to myself. And I find myself sharing that with a lot more people going through challenging times, going, nothing stays. It's just like the sun's going to come back out tomorrow. So this too shall pass.
Fantastic. Last question. Where can people learn more about you and your work?
People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Dipti Patel, and my website is diptipatel.net. And my very recent experiments in writing, it's on Substack. So it's diptipatel.substack.com.
Fantastic.
This is fantastic.
All right, Dipti, thank you so much for appearing on the show. And with that, we come to the end of another edition of Wholly Fractional. I want to thank the world's best co-host and my partner in part-time, Todd Hines, for making this journey with me. Dipti, again, thank you so much to you. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us today. Until next time, in the words of my good friend, Todd Hines, stay healthy, stay safe, and stay fractional.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, Todd.